Something happened, and it's the most visceral paranormal experience I've ever experienced. I felt something land at the end of my bed where my feet were laid. I looked over and thought something maybe had dropped on my bed. And what I saw is what I can only describe as the impressions of an object pushing down on the bed, just about the size of what a cat's paw would be. I could see it pushing down, then another one pushing down, as if it was walking left to right, all the way up the side of my body. It went from one side of the room to the other, shouting insults at her. Objects were being moved around the room. It's like it was, for the first time, it was scared. Whatever it was, I don't know if it was human, it was something, but it had never experienced fear like it before because it was weak. It seemed to have drawn from the trauma and the sadness and the suffering from myself and my family during this time. I grew up in a haunted house. Just saying it out loud now just sounds ridiculous, really. Society tells us what is and is not possible. Yet, the time I spent in this house, I had experienced things that defied logic, that were, at least what I'm told, impossible. Yet, I have those experiences I just can't forget. I can't shake this off. Through this channel, I've spoken to many people who have experienced these kind of things. I know friends who have experienced these things. I know family members who have. So the paranormal is more normal than you think. Back then, this was the early 90s. This was back in the day where you didn't have the internet to connect with other people who have maybe experienced things that you have, maybe like minds and such. Back then, if you were to talk about these kind of things, you were met with ridicule. You weren't welcome in society. You were forced out of cliques and just generally unwelcomed by the church or any religious establishment you were part of at the time. I felt lost when all this happened to me, and it's something that I wish wouldn't happen. We need to be brave in talking about the unknown. Knowing is, I suppose, the resolution for fear. It's our immediate response when we encounter the void. And talking about these experiences at least educates others that these things do happen, and I hope that you may learn something from this little story. I lived in Oxford. I lived on a street called Sweetmans Road. It sounds very warm and welcoming, Sweetmans, but it was anything but. It's a house that overlooked Oxford City itself. We had this beautiful view of the city because the house itself was sat upon a hill. You could see Oxford University, the various different colleges across the whole of Oxford. You could literally see the whole of Oxford. It was amazing. Yet the house itself, on the flip side, just felt off. It was a house built at the end of the Second World War for the soldiers returning from the conflict. So I imagine that may have played a part in the strange energies in this place. The house itself was relatively an okay size. It wasn't too squeezy, but enough to situate my mother and my sister. When I moved in, I remember it being relatively normal. I was just recovering from an accident I had experienced a year or two before. So I still had a few aches and pains. I had PTSD from the accident. I was still trying to return to normal life, and I do consider this to be part of this experience because something maybe followed me after this NDE, which is a near-death experience. The first moment where I began to feel that something was off in this property was when I was sat in the living room. And it was daytime, quite a sunny day I remember, and my sister was in the house. I heard whistling outside. I assumed straight away that it maybe was a neighbour. It could have been somebody walking by, so I dismissed it. I heard more whistling to the tune of a kind of music that I didn't understand, and it got louder. And I thought, okay, this is strange, because it sounded like it was in the front garden. I heard more whistling, so loud that I thought, okay, I need to investigate. There's somebody in our garden. What's going on? I opened the front door, looked out the front, and there was no one there. I walked down the steps, opened the gate to the front of a house. Nobody was there. I then heard whistling so sharp happen just behind me. I immediately jumped and turned around, expecting there to be someone there. Nothing. So I ran straight back to the house, feeling a bit uneasy. I opened the front door again and shouted to my sister, "Are you messing around with me?" And she said, "No." So somebody keeps whistling, and that's when we both heard it. We heard whistling inside the house. I ran up to my sister thinking she must be still praying a plank. She said no, it wasn't her. We dismissed it and carried on. Just thought, okay, well, something is a bit odd. Like, I, in my mind, tried to dismiss it as it was something illogical. In my gut, something felt off. And it's when I, for the first time, felt this feeling of pulling. It's like gravity shifted in my gut, and it's like I was being pulled down. Everything began to get very, very heavy. And it just, I don't know, gave me the creeps. So I carried on with my day, trying to dismiss that incident. A couple of days later, I was in the house on my own. I heard whistling again, very, very loud from the inside of the house. And I ran to the kitchen because I assumed it was in that area. Called out to my sister. Nobody responded. I remembered she wasn't there that day. I heard whistling again in the living room, ran straight to the front of the house. Nobody was there. And it just got louder and louder and louder. When these situations did stop, I just had no choice, of course, but just to carry on, I suppose. And it just kept happening. It kept happening again and again and again. And over time, we had multiple witness accounts where me and my sister would be in the kitchen with a couple of friends over just having a chat. We all would hear whistling coming from the living room. We joked, me and my sister, that, okay, it's just a ghost, it's just a ghost, just ignore it. And they just would laugh because, yeah, you would assume you'd be joking. And then, and I never will forget this, we heard the most almighty loud whistle in the middle of our group. There was 4 of us in total at the time. And that's where I asked, like, did you all hear that? And they said, yeah. And this time it was so strange. It sounded like it was in the middle of all of us, like it was loud. But at the same time, the whistle had a very, very recognisable echo, as if it was in a large room, yet it was in the kitchen. I remember that distinctly, that just, it didn't sound right. It almost sounded like maybe it was a recording in a way. So yeah, I checked our radio at the time to see if it was turned on. That was turned off. I checked to see if there were any other gadgets nearby that could be influencing this activity, and yeah, there's nothing I could see. Like, we were quite a poor family at the time. Like, we had one radio, we had a very small old broken TV, and that was it really. Like, I don't think there could have been anything else to cause that. I did check the ventilation in the rooms around the house to see if maybe there were some sounds maybe being transported from a property nearby, maybe our next door neighbour. But no, nothing. We just got used to this. Like, what else can you do? You can't exactly call a priest to talk about this. There's no hotline for whistling ghosts. And over time, the feeling moved from being quite uneasy and unsure to being quite calm and welcoming. In a way, it's like it became another member of the house. We couldn't explain it, so what else could we do than just live with it? Because it wasn't going to cause us any harm. At least we felt it wasn't. We felt like it was comforting in a way. About a couple of months later, things began to escalate further. Alongside the whistling, we began to get smells on the property. More specifically, just in front of the old fireplace in our living room. And keep in mind, this fireplace was boarded up, no longer in use, and had been boarded up for many years. We would always smell cigar smoke. Me and my sister didn't smoke at the time. My mum did. Whenever she smoked her cigarettes, she would be in the garden, and it would be a particular brand I'd recognise the smell of. This cigar smoke was very dense in the living room, and was so strong I could feel the burning in my nose. I suppose at that point I didn't see it as being too unusual. We got used to the whistling. Smells, I suppose, aren't going to hurt us. And this smell would just suddenly increase, almost like it just suddenly materialized out of nowhere. And then it would dissipate after about 5 minutes, and then a few days would go by, then it would just reappear again. I have considered the fact that there could be something in the fireplace that, with the wind still maybe blowing through, it could be blowing through charcoal or various different remnants of what was left there. As far as we know of what the property was at the time, the chimney itself was cleaned, it was blocked at the top, so no air would be passing through. And I just can't explain it. I think the time where it was the strongest smoke, I saw wisps of smoke in the air at that point, as if something was actually burning. That's where I went to check any electronics nearby to see if there was anything, maybe a light, and luckily not the case. And it's strange, only me and my sister could smell that, but my mum didn't. Or maybe she didn't tell us. I don't know. Again, we just carried on with our lives. Nothing unusual there. Yeah, so over this time, we began to live a normal life. We got on with our neighbours. They were really sweet. Our school was at the top of the hill. Everything was relatively normal in terms of our life at the time, other than, I suppose, my trauma that I was living with. So with that activity being experienced by multiple people, there was activity that I experienced just myself. I had night terrors at that time, and these lasted for a good couple of years. I'd have one or two every week where I'd have different nightmares about different things. Sometimes I would be chased by dinosaurs. Sometimes I would be chased by doctors through the hospital. Sometimes I would be stuck in an abandoned silo in the middle of nowhere. I would have these incredibly vivid dreams. And I'd always wake up completely drenched in sweat, panting, crying out for my mum. And I remember specifically every single time I would look out to the corner of my room because I felt something was there. And I would usually see the outline of what I would describe as a man. Kind of like this man was enveloped in smoke, like it was there just watching, very slowly moving. It's not like it was completely still, it was just waving left and right, as if it wasn't fully formed, but just floating there, I suppose. And I mentioned it to my mum a few times, and she naturally just wanted to dismiss it because she assumed it was part of the night terror. And for anybody who hasn't experienced a night terror before, it's ultimately like having a nightmare that crosses over into reality because you're still hallucinating your nightmare as you wake up. So that could be a consideration there. But as the night terrors began to subside, they'll get less and less terrifying. Believe it or not, I would still have these vivid hallucinations that weren't very nice. The man would still remain. Eventually, over time, as I began to heal, those night terrors would transform into standard nightmares. I'd wake up from having a nightmare, not so much in a sweat and shivering, and the man would be there, just watching in the corner, watching, waiting. And this was similar to the entity that I met in the hospital before, where I had my near-death experience. I'd met this entity that was watching me at the end of my hospital bed, gnarled skin, white glowing eyes, and I saw it just peek at the end of my bed, kind of with its long spindly fingers curving over the edge of the protective barrier at the end of my bed. I remember that was the first time, and I saw it for years after. So yeah, those were the night terrors, which I'll never forget. Things escalated further. Activity increased where one night I was woken up by music and laughter. It was roughly about 3 o'clock in the morning, where I don't know, I just shot out of bed really, just kind of annoyed, I suppose, because I had school the next day and I needed to get my sleep. I opened the window to see if a neighbour had a party, and I couldn't quite decipher where the noise was coming from, but it was so loud. It was so loud, and I was surprised that it didn't wake up my sister or my mum. Yeah, I tried to ignore it after going back to sleep, and it just continued. It was so loud. I could hear people laughing. I could hear this music that I didn't recognise. It sounded old, like it was from another time maybe. And yeah, as I began to realise that it was actually coming from inside my room, that the fear hit me. The fear was really a breaking of logic. Well, sound can't emanate from nothing, yet there it was, in my room. Was I hallucinating? Maybe. I jumped under my covers, scared. I didn't know what was going on, and I tried to get back to sleep. And the music just got louder and louder and louder, and eventually I did pass out. I was so exhausted. And I woke up the next morning, my room was silent, and I spoke to my sister. I said, "Did you hear any music last night?" And she said, No. I was out like a light, really. Same from my mum. And yeah, that next night, I went to bed thinking, is it going to happen again? It didn't. So I slept relatively well, still maybe a bit uneasy, which did affect my sleep somewhat. The next night, the party started again. I heard music coming from the middle of my room. I could hear different voices talking. I could hear glasses clinking. I could hear boots on the floor, interestingly enough. I could hear people almost singing these chants and these rhymes. It's like a jovial kind of thing, quite happy. And eventually, just like the whistling and smells in the property, I just accepted it as part of the property. It didn't feel like it meant me any harm. I just got used to it, so it would wake me up about 3 or 4 times a week in the middle of the night, roughly around the same time between 2 and 3 a.m. At a point, it became comforting. It became like a friend, like I knew them. So, yeah, I mean, another part of my crazy time in this house. Then the activity escalated further. I had a cat called Puss. Gorgeous, gorgeous tortoiseshell cat, and she was very much my friend, my protector, maybe, my familiar. Because when I returned from the hospital with this PTSD, trauma, whatever you may use to describe it, she was always around me. And she used to sleep next to me most nights on my bed. She would usually sleep at the top of my head, and like a little hat, I suppose. It was really nice, actually. And I felt like she was part of my healing journey. I hate talking about this story, so apologies, but... And then that night happened. A man was speeding through the street late at night. Cars parked both sides, and Puss was out there on the street crossing the road. She didn't have a chance. She was hit head on and died instantly. At least I can be thankful for that. And the man got out of his car, and my mum instinctively knew what happened. I could hear some sort of an altercation coming from the window upstairs, and my mum had essentially leant out of the window and was shouting at this man in the street, is that a tortoiseshell cat? And he said, yeah. And she ran down the stairs. I could hear her clomping down and slammed open the front door. And there was Puss in front of this man's car that he was so important that he had to race through our street in his lovely luxury sports car. She lifted her up, and the man himself was just busy blaming the cat for getting in the way, never an apology or kind word. It was all about the fault of it being the cat. But anyway, my mum brought Puss to us, and she turned off the lights so we couldn't see how horrible her state was in, but we sat there with her and she explained what happened. Again, we were quite young then, but old enough to know about death and, life moving on, essentially. And I sat there and I couldn't believe it. I remember being numb, and Puss was there I could see the outline of my friend, but I could see she, as her being, wasn't there anymore. She was gone. And I was distraught, but numb, if that can be an ambivalence that even works. But yeah, and our neighbour very kindly took Puss's body into their garden just so we could have a night to process it. And yeah, our neighbours were great. They're so lovely. And I went to bed that night just feeling broken, like I didn't know what to do. It's like that cat was part of my soul. She was part of me recovering from my near-death experience. And I laid in bed just looking up at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. And something happened. And it's the most visceral paranormal experience I've ever experienced. I felt something land at the end of my bed where my feet were laid. I looked over and thought something maybe had dropped on my bed. I could hear purring. Puss's purring was quite loud, actually, when she was alive. It was very distinct, as well, a distinct rhythm. And I could hear it. And I shouted, "Puss?" And, of course, you wouldn't expect a cat to respond, but usually when I used to call her name, she would come straight to me. And I leant up from laying on the bed, just enough to look where my feet were. And what I saw is what I can only describe as the impressions of an object pushing down on the bed, just about the size of what a cat's paw would be. I could see it pushing down, then another one pushing down, and another one as if it was walking left to right, all the way up the side of my body. I felt like I should be freaking out at this point, but I felt at complete ease. I felt completely peaceful. It was like I was maybe hypnotized in some way or form. I could hear her purring. I could see the footsteps slowly move up the side of my body. It got louder and louder as it got closer to my ear. And at this point, I could actually feel the heat of something there, as if a body was actually there. And I went up past my ear, up around my head, and it sat. I could feel the full weight above my head. I could hear her purring, and she always went to sleep, as I said, above my head, and it felt like she was there one last time. Now, I remember specifically putting my hand over my head to feel like, is she really there? My hand went straight through. There was nothing. And I knew this would be my last time with her. So I laid awake for gosh, like maybe a couple of hours. Like I was forcing myself to stay awake as long as I could because I instinctively knew this was my last time with her. And this haunting, imagine a haunting lasting 2 hours. It was relentless, and I was just there in this moment, not questioning anything, just being there, feeling her warmth, speaking to her, and eventually I fell asleep. Next morning I woke up. I immediately put my hand above my head to check if I could feel anything there. There was nothing, no purring, no weight, no warmth, and I knew she was gone. I woke up strangely feeling at peace. It's like I had a chance to say goodbye. And yes, I was sad that my best friend had gone, but I felt like in some way or form she did to say one final goodbye because she was my, I don't know, spiritual protector, I suppose. And I kind of questioned, like, how is that possible? Even then I thought, well, people or animals can't come back from the dead. And it poses the question, like, what is consciousness? If consciousness can survive without a body, and maybe can affect reality, then where is consciousness coming from? What is it truly? So yeah, and that's why I'm so fascinated by the paranormal, because I've seen incredible things. And I question, well, the house itself, was there an energy in the house that helped to catalyze these events? Was it something almost like a battery in a way that allowed these strange events to happen? I don't know. Was it the entity that maybe followed me home doing this? Was it playing a trick on me? Maybe. In my heart of hearts, I knew that was Puss. I knew it wasn't any form of a mimicry. I knew it wasn't, I don't know, me wanting it to happen, maybe like a hallucination of sorts through trauma. It was as real as anything, and I saw it. And I never will forget that to the day I die in this life. And then it escalated further, as I keep saying. So yeah, this is where it began to get darker. And I wonder if Puss leaving was the one thing that was holding back whatever was in this property. At the time, I was beginning to go through the standard process of bullying. I was bullied relentlessly at school because I was quite a gifted kid at the time. I was really good at the things that I did. I was great at art. I loved education. I loved the smell of a lecture theatre. I loved just getting into the nooks and crannies of things because partly it's a distraction from the trauma that I've experienced, but also, to me, I feel like acquiring knowledge is acquiring power. And the power not being to control things, the power of understanding and acceptance of our reality, the power to know what this world is about. And yeah, I'd be kicked and shoved. I'd had various insults about me strewn around to my face, or completely false stories made up about me at school. Just everything they could do to make me feel as isolated and unwelcome as possible because I dared to be myself. At this time, you can imagine, emotions were quite high. That could also feed into these situations. I came back from school one day just feeling fed up, exhausted, just I wanted it to be over, but I knew that I had years to go yet till I left this school. The teachers weren't helping. My mum tried her best, but these kids were just relentless. They just kept going on and on and on. So eventually, yeah, I returned back home, flumped back on the sofa, was ready just to give up, really. I turned on the TV. I started watching, of all programs, Most Haunted as well, which is quite hilarious. And in front of me was a tea table. And it was just far enough away from me where I couldn't kick it easily. I could maybe touch it with my toes. And on it was this metal bowl, and it was full of these jelly sweets. I was really just trying to zone out at that time. And then maybe about 5 minutes later, I was partway through watching the program. I can only describe as an explosion happened. The bowl itself, I could see in my vision. It wasn't in my peripheral. I was actually looking directly at the TV, and the bowl was ever so slightly to the right. I saw the bowl jump off the table about a couple of centimetres, like it was hit with force. And as it was at the pinnacle, at the peak of this jump, all the sweets in this bowl exploded and shot across the room. Some hit me in the face, some hit the TV. I could hear like the clattering going everywhere. And then the bowl landed on the table with force. How can that happen? Why did that happen? But when this happened, unlike the other experiences that I had in the house, it felt off. It felt like, again, gravity was being pulled down. Something strange was happening, but I felt like something didn't want me to be there. Like something wanted me to be out of the room. So I ran. naturally. It was so shocking to see it. And yes, I've tried to explain this away logically. Thermodynamics, heat leaving an object, a metal object, may cause it to contort back into place, or I suppose decontort, if that's even a word. I suppose just flex back into place. That's one possibility. It wasn't really a hot day. It would have had sunlight on the object. But that still wouldn't account for the fact that it jumped off the table. It came upwards and then popped and strew everything across the room. That was the start of things getting very dark in the property. There were nights when things just felt off on the property. We wouldn't hear the whistling anymore. We wouldn't smell the cigar smoke. We didn't hear the party. Things just felt off, like there was something in the house, like there was a large something in the house. I felt like we were creeping around it. That's when me and my sister began to have these strange dreams. At the time, I thought just I was having it. What would happen is 2 to 3 times a night, and this would last for years even. But anyway, I would have this dream where I was stood in a void. It was infinitely dark, and just in the middle of it was a small light illuminating this rug. As I slowly walked towards the rug, I could see it was quite ornate. It was quite pretty to look at. And as I approached the rug, I had this knowing. It's like I couldn't hear a voice. It felt like there was a presence in my mind that interfered with me. And it told me that my job is to fold this rug in half. And I thought that was a strange request, but okay, I just did it, didn't really question. So in this dream, I folded the rug in half, and I folded the rug in half again. And I realized that the more I folded it, it didn't half. It was still the complete rug. But at the same time, it was folded. It was like this, it was almost like a paradox in a way. And I folded it again and again and again and tried to do this one task, and it just wouldn't accept. And in this dream, I would always get faster and faster at doing this task. I would rush and I'd rush and I'd rush and I'd feel this growing panic. And usually by the end of the dream, I was in such a state, panicking and panicking, and it's almost because something was trying to force me to do this task. At the same time, I couldn't comprehend the fact that this thing wouldn't fold, and it's like I was observing an infinite object. And I'd wake up from those dreams, sweating, shaking, and as I would wake up, I would realize that the dream itself wasn't really scary, but for some reason being in that dream was scary. It felt like I was being empowered, I suppose wouldn't be the word, it's more overpowered by something. And I'd have those dreams, as I say, about 2 to 3 nights, and I'd have them for a good year, I suppose, when it first started at that property. And really, it wasn't until years later, after leaving that property, that I realised, actually, there's a link here, because I still kept having those. And I eventually called my sister one day and said, look, I've been having these dreams for years, can I just tell you about it? Because, we would share these weird things when we were at the property. And I explained to her this dream, and that's where she went silent on the phone. And she said, I can't believe it. I've had that exact same dream for years and years and years, and I haven't told you about it. And I said to her, did we experience the same trauma when we were kids that could possibly trigger that? I had the accident, but you didn't. We had a bad dad at the time and a bad stepdad also. Could that be a factor that plays into maybe an illustration of how we feel through this meme? But either way, it doesn't account for the fact that we had this specific dream for around the same time for many years. And it was only until we stopped having that conversation, the dream never came back. So I question now, why did we have that dream? Was it for us to both talk about it? Was it an effect of us living at Sweetmans Road and like a leftover? Like I say, that particular, I would call it a haunting still, lasted for years after I left the property. But at the time, just keep in mind that this dream was happening constantly all the time when things began to get darker. So going back to my time when I was at the property, things hit its peak. I came back after school after another day of severe bullying, and then I was in an absolute state. I was in tears. I just felt like my friends weren't helping, the teachers weren't helping, the teachers didn't care. Nobody was there to help me. Nobody could care less, I suppose. Nobody thought anything of me. I didn't want to exist. That was my mindset at the time. It's a really dark place to be, really, when you're, at that point, a teenager. I ran to my bedroom door, and just as I touched the handle, I felt that pulling feeling down, and it was the most strongest feeling I've felt since. I felt like I was almost being dragged into the floor, like my legs were almost buckling. And when I opened the door, I can only describe what I saw was a vortex. I opened the door, and what I saw was my bedroom. It was daytime at the time, a sunny day, yet in my bedroom it was nighttime. I could see the curtains were open, but through the window I could see it was night. The room itself was distorting, almost pulsing. I could see the pulsing was slowly contorting and twirling to a central point in the room. It was where this storage cupboard was. So reality was dark in this room. It was distorted. I could see almost flickers of something in the dark, like there were these specks of light. It's almost like a universe, I suppose, folding in on itself. And I felt like it was sucking me in, like I was being pulled towards this, almost like a black hole in a way. I resisted it. I refused to enter the room, and I had to pull away with force. It's like something was physically pulling me there at that point. And I managed to pull myself away just enough to fall back into the landing. And I shot down those stairs like you wouldn't believe, screaming, running through the house out into the garden. And at that time, nobody was at home. I just sat in the garden, just shivering and shaking, waiting for my mum to come back home. So I knew like this had to stop now. It was just getting ridiculous. I felt like I was in danger. I told my mum about this situation, and before I hadn't gone into detail about the hauntings there, but this time I told her absolutely everything because, yeah, I mean, we're a single parent family. So my mum had a lot on her shoulders. She was working 3 jobs at the time to fund me and my sister. We were very poor, just trying to make ends meet. I didn't want to add more to her burden by telling her this, but I had to. I just had to. She believed me. I told her everything, and she could see the shock in my face. Maybe that was enough. Either way, we had to do something about this. We couldn't live in this house anymore because something was growing, something was getting darker. And luckily, my mum had a friend, and I didn't know if my mum knew she was a medium at the time. I met this lady for the first time when she was visiting my mum, and she looked at me. She gave me this strange look. At the time, I didn't know what a medium was. I watched Most Haunted, but I assumed that mediums were for more entertainment. She was incredible, really. She gave me this strange look. It's like she was drawn to me and she was reading me. Like it was like I was being scanned by a machine, basically. Like she was getting something, and it's almost like she winced back. Something wasn't good. I was thinking, well, do I smell or something? But no, what really happened was she said, look, okay, you don't know me just yet. She explained who she was, and she was a friend of her mum. She says, look, okay, like I'm at your house now, and there's something wrong here, and I need to tell you I know what this thing is. I know that there's something wrong here that's not welcome here, and let's get rid of it. She talked about the experience that I had, like the objects moving, the darkness in the room. She recognized that even before I told her about that. What she also recognized was she recognized the effects this thing had on me. What I haven't told you yet is when I was at school, all the bullying, I do believe some of the experiences were fueled by something that was attached to me. So there was this thing in the house that made me feel drained and empty and horrible, and bullies maybe latched onto that. But what kept happening was grown-ups. You think grown-ups would have control over their actions and their thoughts. I was the most politest, sweetest kid. I did everything I could to avoid any conflict. I was always on time for class. I did my homework. I was responsive and polite and organised. But I would never get any thanks in return for it. Because what would happen was, and I remember one specific moment, my maths teacher absolutely hated me. I didn't know why. I'd never done anything to him. I'd been very polite. I wasn't the best at maths, but that was it. I remember this one conversation. I had been sent some homework and I struggled with this particular equation. I said to him, look, okay, I'm stuck. Can you help me? Like, this is what I've done so far, but I can't come up with the right answer just yet. Like, what am I doing wrong? And rather than doing what a normal teacher should be doing, he just, I don't know, I remember looking into his eyes and there's something wrong with his eyes. It's like nobody was there. It was strange. He flipped a chair, started shouting something in anger, and I can't remember exactly what he said. Flipping the chair and flipping a table, shouting, like ranting. I don't know what it was. My heart was pounding in my chest. It's like me as a little kid back then. But I remember him coming to his senses just a moment later, like he'd even shocked himself. I saw his eyes were normal again, like glossy and as eyes should normally be, I suppose. And it's like he was shocked and embarrassed. And I remember him walking out of the room. And I thought, okay, that's odd. And these situations kept happening. I'd have maths teachers, gym teachers start shouting and ranting. And I used to work at a frozen food store at the time. I'd have customers like do similar things, like completely a full escalation out of nowhere, uninstigated. And it kept happening. This is what she talked about in this vision that she had, the medium that came to my house. Now returning back to the end of the story. She said basically there was something around me that had attached itself to me that found me in the hospital during my NDE experience. This thing had affected me for many years and had been the perpetrator of many different events. It had affected the people around me. Maybe it could be a temporary possession. I just don't know how that would work. But either way, she said, look, I'm here to help you now. Like, this thing has to go. You don't need to live with this thing anymore. You need to just be a normal kid. Just live your life again. And as she was talking to me about this, I remember this weird thing happening where my body couldn't stop shaking. I wasn't cold. I wasn't adrenalized either. I was just shaking, like I physically couldn't stop doing it. And I kind of felt embarrassed when that happened, though. But I just thought, okay, well, either way, regardless of the situation, maybe this lady might be able to do something about it. Maybe not. Who knows? And what happened was, I don't know if it was a few days later, like she came here to deal with it. And with me telling this part of the story, I'm telling this third hand, essentially, rather than first hand. So she asked me to leave, and she was there with my mum at the time in my bedroom dealing with this thing. My mum told me what she saw, the medium lady had seen. She saw this entity in my room. I don't know what she did, and I don't know how mediums work really, but either way, she did something to anger it, to make it feel like it's no longer welcome. Apparently it went from one side of the room to the other, shouting insults at her. Objects were being moved around the room. It's like it was, for the first time, it was scared. Whatever it was, I don't know if it was human, it was something, but it had never experienced fear like it before because it was weak. It seemed to have drawn from the trauma and the sadness and the suffering from myself and my family during this time. And this medium lady just fought the hell out of it. She really went for it, and eventually she was able to force this thing out of the house, and seemingly, and it seems like it did happen, away from me. It seemed to detach itself from me, because after she had experienced this event, I remember the day after waking up with this new pair of eyes. I felt hopeful. I felt excited about the future. I felt comfortable around people like I wasn't in a world full of predators. It's like I felt like I was just a kid again. I felt light of heart. I felt like I could talk to my friends again and wanted to be near people. And yeah, I don't know what she did, but either way, it separated me from this thing. About a couple of years later, it's one of those events that happened where we just didn't talk about it after, because in a way we were afraid to talk about it because it may influence it and may invite it to come back again. That's the last thing we needed, really. But eventually I got back in contact with her, and I asked her, like, okay, well, what did happen? Like, what was your experience? And again, like, thank you for doing this for me, because this is how it changed my life. And I told her the story about the years that followed. And she simply said, look, I saw this thing, and she described it. It was a tall, dark man, almost like in fog or mist, smoke or whatever it was, with gnarly, stark skin, tall, with white, glowing eyes in the dark. And that's where my heart dropped. This thing that I'd seen for many years, that had been in my room whenever I came out of these night terrors, it was real. I hadn't told it. I suppose I knew it was real from my experiences, though, but I hadn't said this to anybody to validate those experiences. My mum didn't know about it. I hadn't described the way it looked to her or my sister or anybody that I knew. I kept it to myself because it's just too extreme and too unbelievable to tell. Yet this lady somehow knew exactly how it looked, and she even drew a picture of it for me. There it was. It was real. She saw it. So yeah, I mean, that was the end of my time at Sweetmans Road. Eventually, my mum moved into a new house and we went with her. When I left that house, I mean, I look back on this time with fond memories because I did have some good memories there, like birthdays and events with friends and all sorts. But I realised that for much of our time there, we, as in all of us, my mum, my sister, and me, were affected by this entity, me and my sister more so. We were controlled by something that wasn't even human, maybe. It didn't feel human, I suppose. And I look back on this house fondly, not just for the memories with my family, it's also the fact that I had experienced things in that house that not many humans get to see. Not many people talk about it in this world, that there are things out there that aren't human that can do extraordinary things, that can influence behavior. They can influence the physical environment around them and distort your own perception of reality. They can affect your emotions. This time in this haunted house, it was the time that sparked my adventure. And this is why I wrote the book Paranormality. Paranormality is my first debut novel that is out in March 2026, so not far away now. And it's the culmination of many years of paranormal experiences that I was too afraid to tell because I didn't want to be judged. But at the same time, I didn't want to talk about these kind of things because I didn't want this thing to come back, whatever it was. And this book really is a hug to those that have experienced things that they're too afraid to talk about. It's there as a validator to show that these extraordinary things can happen to the most ordinary people like myself, and that it's okay to talk about these things, and you can come through these experiences better and maybe more knowledgeable about the world and yourself even. And so this book is kind of part of that mission of understanding, and also, I suppose, as a calling card, really. Reading that book is your invitation to understand and explore the unknown, ask questions, test and theorize and research and analyze, and talk to other people about their experiences too, because they may have seen things that you haven't seen. Gather that library of comparables for your knowledge base that builds your new understanding of the world and essentially form your new perception of this reality. And yeah, I feel so lucky and unlucky that I experienced these things. And this is just the first step of a very, very big story that I will reveal over the coming years. And the first part of it is in my first book, Paranormality, Normalizing the Paranormal. I hope this story helps you in your situation because you maybe have experienced things like this yourself. Or maybe you as a skeptic may take this as consideration that things can happen and that it's okay to talk about these kind of things. It's okay for you to tell me, I don't believe this happened. That's okay too. I have a body of evidence that I've built over time, and it's something that I can't forget, and I would love to understand this one day. Yeah, if you've had any experiences like this yourself, please feel free to comment below. Share with me, like, this is a place of no judgment. Everything you say is valid and only offers maybe others another view into another reality, so they may also gather their understanding and strengthen their knowledge about this world. So anyway, that was quite an emotional discussion, and I hope this conversation was okay. Stay tuned. We have a lot more people talking on this channel about their experiences. But unlike many channels out there, people who present these people to you with these experiences, not many presenters have really walked the walk, so to speak, and have actually been through the paranormal through and through. So yeah, so stay tuned. I have a lot more to share with you. You take care. Sleep tight.
Giving a voice to those without a choice, sharing dreams and blowing off steam. We'll lend you a hand, we'll let you stand, sharing stories about the unknown. Paranormal perspectives, we're here to inspect it. I'm a small, not a medium. Let us escape from this tedium, learning from each other, breaking barriers, a message of hope, birthed from the unknown. Who you gonna call? I'm not a ghostbuster, no proton packs, just crossing streams of knowledge. It's not so scary when things get hairy. It's not the paranormal, just future normal. Breaking barriers, no longer the carrier, releasing the fear and replacing it with knowledge. Understanding each other, we uncover a whole new point of view within you. Paranormal perspectives, we're here to inspect it. I'm a small, not a medium. Let us escape from this tedium, learning from each other, breaking barriers, a message of hope, birthed from the unknown. The only stream we need to cross is the platforms to get the message across. Knowing each other, sister to brother. No ghost or spirit or demon will ever get the better of this medium. Paranormal perspectives, we're here to inspect it. I'm a small, not a medium. Let us escape from this tedium, learning from each other, breaking barriers, a message of hope, birthed